This is the hinge drill. So this is the first drill I like to do because I want to show athletes that it's not about trying to duck down and jump as high as you can like you're going to try to dunk a basketball. It's more about maintaining that speed through the takeoff. And so I like to think of it as a hinge. And a hinge, for those that might not be aware of it, maybe younger athletes, the way you can coach this is tell them, okay, we're going to open up a door, right? Now that door opens on a hinge. And notice that when you open that door, the door doesn't bend as you open it, right? The door stays stiff, it opens, right? And the wall doesn't bend either, right? It bends from a pivot point as you open, and then you close it, and it closes from that pivot point. So when we think about taking off, when I jump, I'm going to have my foot being the hinge or the pivot point, and I want to try to think of keeping my body as straight as possible. When I jump, I don't want to deform. The door doesn't bend, right? So when I pivot, I want to pivot over. So I'm going, imagining a straight line going from my ankle up through my lower leg, through my leg, up through my torso, and up through my head. And then as I rotate over, I want to try to maintain that pivot line, that straight line, right? So I'm pivoting over from touchdown, which is the moment my foot touches the ground for takeoff, and at toe off, which is the moment my toe leaves the ground. I want to try to pivot my torso angle from a slight rear lean to a slight forward lean. So the way we can set this drill up is, say I'm a left-footed jumper. So I'm going to have my foot right here out in front of me, my right foot slightly back, and I'm going to try to get a straight line. And the way I'm going to do this is, at first I like to have them do it with a bend. So I say, okay, bend, bend, put the weight on the back, and then go from rear to forward. So I have them do that first. And I say, okay, you saw that you're bent, there wasn't a lot of movement. Now try to do the opposite. Now try to be like a stiff board. So I say, okay, now I want you to squeeze your quad and squeeze your glute. So now they're stiff. Okay, and I say, okay, now push off from your back leg. So get some weight loaded up in that back leg, and I want you to push off that back leg to push your body forward. And the first thing you'll probably see is this, right? And you say, okay, well, let's do it again, and this time, let's try to maintain this line, this arm tight from our torso to our legs. So let's not let our chest bend or our hips bend. Let's stay as stiff as possible. So now I'm gonna push off, and you see that rotation. And you want them to think of that. You want them to think about coming from a slight rear to toe off being a slight forward lean. Because what that does is that means we get full contact with the ground. And so now I'll give you the kind of the story behind why we do it. So I'm running down, and we'll talk about in just a second the penultimate step where we'll pull down, we'll have a low heel recovery, but we're gonna come in with a slight forward. Your foot's gonna be 6 inches to about a foot in front of your body. So I'm slightly in front of my body when my foot makes contact with the ground, when it plants for takeoff. Okay, so I'm a left-footed jumper, so I'm gonna use my left foot as an example. So I land into the ground, boom. Now, when I land, that ground is hard, right? It's not gonna bend. It's not like I'm trying to jump through water, right? If I try to run and I jump off of water, what's gonna happen? That water is gonna move out of the way. Or like if I try to jump off of a bed, the bed's gonna squish down. But this is a hard ground, right? So the ground's not gonna deform. So what happens is Newton's third law, law of reaction. So every action has an equal and opposite reaction. So if I push into that ground's gonna push right back into me, right? So I land here slightly in front of me, I push into that ground. All of that energy that I push into the ground, that force is coming right back into my body. And that's what actually allows us to run, right? Because if I think about when I'm running, I'm not pushing, when I push into the ground, I'm bouncing off of it, right? So if I push into the ground in front of me, it's gonna push back into me. Now, if I run down here and I push into the ground like this, so that ground, all that energy is going into the ground here, but if my torso is leaning forward, it's going up into my leg, and it's going out, all that force is going, kind of going out into nothing, right? So I'm kind of losing my ability to maximize this jump. Same thing is if I come down here and I have a huge lean like this, well, that force is coming into the ground, and now it's kind of coming out into nothingness up here. I want a straight line between my foot and my body, out and out through the top of my head. That's maximum. That's all energy in, all energy out, even though there is technically energy wasted, but that's how we can conceptualize this, okay? So I'm gonna have a slight forward lean, energy goes into the ground, energy comes back into me. Now, it's impossible to really actually jump with a straight leg, not actually deforming at all, right? If you've ever seen some videos online of some athletes, they might have slipped at the takeoff board and their leg hyperextends. What you always see is they hyperextend and then they get a ton of height, right? They pop up and get a ton of height. What happens is you're coming into the ground. If you don't deform, you can really get a ton of vertical velocity. So you're able to not get a crazy big takeoff angle, but the velocity goes into the ground. And because you're not bending and deforming, which takes time, energy goes into the ground and immediately comes back into you. If I bend, so if I come down here and I bend my knee and I bend my hip, then that takes time and then I have to explode. That's a lot longer than if it was just boom, into the ground, right back into me. So what we want to do is we want to have as little amount of deformation as possible. And I'll talk about some other concepts like the stretch shortening cycle in just a little bit, but really emphasize to the athlete, straight leg, we want to hinge, and then we want to have rear torso lean, forward torso lean at toe off. All right, let's talk to the next one.